Continuing on with these guards, today I'm going to look at wiring up the edges of the sides. So a wired edge is literally where you fold over the edge of the panel and you insert a wire in it. This wire I'm using is actually in New Zealand called number 8 fencing wire. It's about 4mm diameter steel wire, and what you do is you fold up a flange to 90 degrees on the edge of the panel, and then you clamp the wire in place with the vice grips there, and then you hammer the metal around the wire to clinch it down. So this was just a little test piece I was doing to make sure I've got the measurements and things correct. So the first thing I do is use the dividers to scribe a line where I'm going to fold up the panel, and then there's various ways you can fold up the edge. I cheat and use my bead roller, and I made these rollers for it. This is just a piece of hunk of plastic, and there's just a 3mm thick metal disc in the top there, and what this does is it will put an indentation in the panel, which then when I fold it, it'll fold along that indentation. So it's just a really easy way to get a nice smooth flange on these panels. My bead roller here is just one of the cheap Chinese ones, but I modified it by adding a small motor drive. It's actually a windscreen wiper motor, and then just a chain and sprocket, just bicycle parts. And there's just a PWM controller in the box. You can go forwards and reverse, and there's a foot pedal for controlling it down there. Now, again, this is one of these places where you can screw up. I'm going to be really careful to make sure that I don't, because if you look at the panels here, the sides, you have to make sure that you fold them the correct direction. So you need one side where the fold comes up and around that way, and then of course on the other side it has to fold around the other way. So just have to be careful when you're actually folding up the flange that you don't make them all the same, because of course they are handed. Now I'm just going to mark out the edge where I want to fold it, and I've actually gone and marked the panel to tell me which side needs to go up when I make these marks, so that I don't mess them up. The other thing I did was, when I first made the guards, I wasn't quite sure how I was going to finish off the corners, the edges. Now that I've done my prototypes, I know how that works. So I actually modified my pattern, and I've trimmed the ends here to be the correct shape now. So I try not to bump the camera. I'm just using dividers to do the scribing, and the width of the flange needs to be about 3 times the diameter of the wire so that it wraps around. So I'm actually doing it about 11.5mm, so just under 3 times. So I will now mark this out, and the zinc coating makes it quite easy to see the scribe lines as it scratches through. I had also gone around with the flat wheel in the angle grinder and just made sure this edge was smooth and there weren't any little steps or bumps, especially where it's been welded, just so that this is a nice smooth edge. When I do the outside, I'll do the same. I'll make sure this is a nice smooth curve. So that's the first one marked out. I'll go ahead and do the rest, and then we'll see how I roll the little indentation into it. This is going to be too awkward for me to do on the actual panels with the tripod and the camera in the way. So I've just got a little test piece here to show how this works. So that's the scribe line on the panel, and then this just goes in between the rollers like this, and then you hit the foot pedal and you basically follow the line, being very careful of course not to get your fingers in there. And so that has now made quite a deep indentation on this panel, and when I go to fold up the flange, it's gonna bend on that line. So that just gives me a really nice straight edge to fold up the corner on. I'll go ahead and do the panels now. Now I've run all of the panels through the bead roller to get the little indentation on them, and I have checked, I've got the mirroring correct, so they're all the right way around. The next job is to fold up the flange, and to do that I start off with this little tool I made, which is just a piece of steel with a slot cut in it, and the slot just fits over the edge of the steel like that, and then you can just go around and bend up the edge bit by bit. You just do it slowly all the way along. It's easier to do this if it's sitting down flat on the table, of course. This is just for demonstration. So go along all the edges like this, folding it up, hoping your welds don't break, which they shouldn't. And because there's that line there already, that break line, that's where it naturally wants to fold. So you don't even have to be that accurate with this. Once we've got the flange up to almost 90 degrees, I swap over to the hammer and dolly and then just tighten it up. Make it a nice flat 90-degree curve. Now, in a few places, like on the curves in the corners, which you can't see, I may need to do a little bit of shrinking, but that should all happen with the hammer and dolly, just to get the flange to come up and around the corner. So that now would be close enough that you could put it on the bench, put the dolly there and hammer up against it to make that flange nice and square. I'll go ahead and start doing the guards. Now I have the flange roughly folded up. I'll go ahead and use the hammer and dolly just to make this edge nice and straight and square. I quite like this bit, but I don't think my neighbours do, because it's quite a lot of hammering, so it gets quite noisy. One thing to note is I'm not folding the flange all the way up, because I still need to roll this edge around so it matches the top. The other thing is, when you're trying to bend the flange up around a tight radius like this, you have to shrink the metal to get it to come up, because it's taking up less space. And it helps to have a good shaped dolly. It's not really a coincidence that the radius of this corner happens to match the radius of this dolly. So that means I can get that in there and hammer up against it quite nicely. So that's the flanges on the four pieces for the rear guards hammered up. You can sort of see in there where the edge is folded over. So now I just have to do the same on the fronts. Okay, now I've got all the flanges bent up, and we're going to go ahead and actually wire the edge. So I've cut a piece of the wire, and it's just held in place with all of these vice grips at the moment. You can never have too many of these things. I was quite lucky. Recently, Element 14 or RS or one of those electronic supply companies had a bunch of these on sale, and it was a 4-pack of these, different sizes, and each pack was only $12. I don't know if that was a mistake or not, because they're actually quite good quality, but I ended up buying 5 packs because they were just too good to pass up. So the wire at the moment is just clamped in place with those. It doesn't have to be perfect, because as we hammer it around, the wire will go to the shape it needs to, following the edge of the panel. And also, to some degree, the panel follows the edge of the wire. It's kind of hard to explain, but as you hammer it, it all kind of evens out. The actual wire I'm using is this fencing wire. I think I mentioned before, of course, in New Zealand, this is known as number 8 fencing wire. It's just 4mm galvanized steel wire. It's not toughened or anything, but it's reasonably stiff. It's a bit of a New Zealand joke. It's sort of an in-joke that the number 8 fencing wire mentality, meaning anything that's broken you could fix with a bit of this stuff. So it's easy to get and it's cheap. To cut it, I invested in a pair of these Knipex cutters, which just make it so much easier. They're just fairly decent bolt cutters. You can just trim them off there. So I've gone and cut the wire, and I've left that a little bit oversized on the edges to allow for wrapping around the top of the guards. So now I've got this in place, I will start hammering it over. So to do this, I've been using my comma dolly just to push up against the wire and hold it in place. And with that in there, I can start hammering the wire over. So this will take a little while. I'll put my ear muffs on and I'll go ahead and do that. I don't try and get the wire all the way around in the first pass. I do multiple passes. So this first go is just to get the wire wrapped about 180 degrees around. The edge wrapped about 180 degrees around the wire. So once again, there's going to be hammering, so noisy. So that's the wire mostly wrapped over. As I say, it's only about 180 degrees at the moment. And you can see just doing that much has warped the panel. It now doesn't sit flat, but we'll fix that later on. So I'm going to move all this over to my piece of railway track, which I've got up in the vise, and I'll use that to start tightening this up. I've moved the camera over so we can see this next bit. I don't know if this is the correct way to be doing this. I think it's one of those things where if you ask 6 different metal workers how to do it, you'd get 6 different answers. This is just what works for me. And I've done a couple of guards now, a couple of the sides now, just to get the practice of it and just to know how to film it best, to show what I'm doing. So if you look at it now, you can see the wire isn't completely wrapped around, the edge isn't completely wrapped around the wire. There's a big gap there. So what I do now is I go ahead and use the railway line as an anvil and start tightening that up. So more hammering. Okay, so now the wire is mostly wrapped by the steel, but it's still not tight. So the next step will be making this a lot neater. So you can see now on this panel, because I've been wrapping the edge around the wire, it's gone and distorted the panel. So it's not sitting flat anymore. But because we've got the wire in there now, the panel is much stiffer, and we can just get it to hold its shape a lot better. So what I've been doing is just bending it over the corner of the table, bit by bit, and you can take that twist out of it just by sort of bending it, manipulating it like that. And that'll get it back to sitting flat, which will make the next stage a little bit easier. So that's mostly flat now. Of course, once it's all done, we can tweak it any way we need to. The metal will just stay where you put it. So the reason I want it flattish, is for this next stage. So now I want to get the wire wrapped very tight against the edge of the steel wrapped very tight against the edge of the wire. So for that, I use my big lump of steel, which has a face cut on it, and this is actually at a slight angle, so this is going to sit in against the bottom of the wire. So put that up against there, and then I just use the hammer and hammer up against it, and that'll tighten up that bottom edge. So once again, more noise. And if you're wondering why I'm puffing, it's because this takes a lot of energy, and it's the middle of summer here. It is a Wellington summer, so it's not exactly tropical, but it is still warm. So I'm actually having to stop and get the sweat out of my eyes quite often. Anyway, back to hammering. So that should be the edge fairly nicely wired now. It's fairly tight all the way around. There are a few places where it's not quite right. I might just give that another tap with the hammer, but you can see it wraps around pretty tightly. And you can also see the panel is again still fairly flat. We can just do a few more tweaks if we need to, but basically that's that. I have left the ends because I still need to curve the top edge here over, and of course I can't do that if the wire's in the way. So I've left a little bit of extra wire there for them wiring the ends of the top. So it's a bit of a pain. These stick into everything, So it's a bit awkward till you get to that end stage, but that's pretty much how that comes out. Hammering against the big flat block like that also helps to straighten out these edges. They're not perfect. I mean, it's never going to be 100%, but it's a handmade car, so that's kind of part of the point of it, is it's all just been hand built. So there are going to be imperfections and little quirks and dings and mistakes, but I think that's part of the charm of it. So I haven't completely finished yet. I've done 6 of the sides. There's 2 more to go, just on there. But I think I've had enough of hammering for the day, so I'm going to stop for now, and I'll finish off the other 2 tomorrow, and then we'll look at doing the top.